rather like economists, lawyers can always find issues on which to disagree. But the issue here is, as I said in my remarks, we are dealing here with unlikely circumstances, and what came through the Attorney's statement was the fact that ultimately this is a political judgment, not a legal judgment. It is for members of this House to assess the political risk. Indeed, as the Attorney himself said, I've had one intervention.
Order. One sentence of no more than 10 words. Spit it out.
Is the Attorney-General going to add to the opinion he's already given? What the honourable gentleman is saying is really strict.
The Secretary of State has already explained that he's speaking for the government. Colleagues must make their own assessment. There is no time to delay. Right, honourable gentleman.
So, well, given I have but 1 minute left, what came through, Mr. Speaker, in the statement this morning is, if I can quote the Attorney, legal advice can only inform a political decision. And tonight the House faces a political decision. We have a strong message from our business community that wants certainty. We have a message from our citizens who want to know their rights are protected. We are a country that stands by its legal obligations, which is why we will settle the financial settlement. But the reality, Mr. Speaker, that we face a fork in the road. It is time to choose. It is time to support this deal. It's time for our country to move forward. I commend the motion to the House.
Order. The question is motion number 3, as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Good. Clear the lobby.
Let's go on now. Hello and welcome to this special ITV News programme on a momentous night in Westminster. We're streaming live on itv.com/news, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. And at this point, the Prime Minister has nothing left, not even her voice. She made her arguments to MPs today until she was hoarse, and in a few minutes' time, they'll deliver their verdict on the latest version of her Brexit deal. Last night, of course, she headed to Strasbourg to sign off a set of assurances negotiated with the EU to prevent Britain being locked into that much-talked-about Irish backstop, the insurance policy, to prevent a hard border with Ireland. She hoped that would persuade MPs, but it barely even convinced her own Attorney-General, whose legal advice remains that Britain could still be trapped, which means tonight's second meaningful vote will probably go a bit like the first one. The predictable part that the Prime Minister is expected to lose, the unknowns, by how much, and what on earth she does next. Well, MPs are voting right now on her deal. We'll bring you the result live in a few minutes. You can see them having emptied the lobby there. They are trooping through the aye and the no lobbies right now, ready to declare that vote, probably about 7:15, we think. And we'll bring you all the reactions to that vote from across the political divide as we try and work out where Britain goes from here. Please do send us your questions, your comments, and I'll do my best to weave those in tonight too. And joining me as we build up to that vote are the Deputy Political Editor for The Spectator, Katie Balls, and the Director of Open Europe and a former advisor to Michael Gove, Henry Newman. Good evening to you guys. Thanks again for joining us for tonight's special programme. So, look, we think she's going to lose, right? The question is, by how much, I guess? I mean, what are you hearing, Katie?
Well, I think at the moment there's some expectation management on the go. So number 10 would like to get this number down. I think everyone would be very surprised if this deal passed. If they can get the defeat, the scale of the defeat, into double figures, last time they lost by 230 votes.
Yeah.
So to even get into double figures, I think.
Do we think she can get to double figures?
I think that would be an achievement and also a slight surprise.
Bit of a stretch.
I think thinking now it's going to be early hundreds. And what Theresa May needs to try and do is somehow suggest that sticking with her deal, she might be able to get a meaningful vote free eventually. And I think that's why you need to get to this as low as possible. But I think the concern is if it's 150 and over.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
What does she do?
Really.
What does she do then, Henry? I mean, if she really does face an absolutely thumping defeat again, surely she can't just bring a meaningful vote 3 on a slight tweak to her deal next time round.
Well, the thing is that there are no good options at this point, and every path is problematic. So stopping Brexit altogether, there's not a majority for that, it doesn't seem. A no-deal Brexit will be blocked by the Commons, so we're talking about a version of the current deal. And I think that, impossible that it may seem, even if the deal is quite heavily defeated tonight, I think the deal will come back from the dead again, and we'll be looking at meaningful vote 3, perhaps the other side of the European Council later this month. But what we will know before that is whether we're going to have a delay to Article 50.
Yeah, because there's these votes tomorrow, right? And Thursday, tomorrow on ruling out no deal, Thursday on potentially extending Article 50. Looks as if MPs will go for that extension.
And there's a possibility, of course, that what the Prime Minister will try and do tonight, if she's still got any voice left, is actually see some of the agenda back. So last time she lost, she almost challenged Labour to call a confidence vote in her government, and she sort of turned a defeat into something of a victory, surprisingly. What she might do tonight is try and actually say that she'll go straight and seek that extension without being forced. So there were some rumours of that. Katie might know more.
Yeah, there's definitely one idea going around in government that the best thing she could do in the face of another eye-watering defeat is say that she is going to try and extend Article 50.
So she takes the initiative rather than MPs forcing her to do it.
Clearly, the Commons can't decide on a Brexit. There's no majority for anything. And even if she does that, though, that is going to be a very difficult thing for her party. Speaking to senior Brexiteers tonight, I think if they were to see the Prime Minister try and delay Brexit, that would be something that would be very lukewarm to them. And there's already calls that perhaps she should think about her position after this, but technically she is safe from challenge to the end of the year because we already had the failed bid by her party to get rid of her.
I mean, if she does go for this extension of Article 50, given that her deal has been so resoundingly defeated, we expect tonight, she's going to have to come up with a more drastic solution, isn't she? Maybe tack towards Labour's version of a deal, maybe have a referendum, a general
Possibly,
election.
but not necessarily. I think the problem with the general election, of course, is that the last thing that her critics on the backbenchers want is Theresa May leading the Tory party into another election. And of course, the Brexit policy for that election would undoubtedly be her deal. So I don't think, although the ERG and some of the ERG are threatening a snap election by withholding their support, I don't think that solves any problems.
Do you ever envisage her calling another general election, given what happened last time, Katie?
I think we're in such untreaded territory that anything could happen, and I do think today, talking to MPs, a general election is something we could get to. But I don't think anyone, including Theresa May, thinks it's a good idea. It's just really, if you exhaust every other option, and the problem is there aren't the numbers in Parliament for anything, one way to break that deadlock is to change the numbers in Parliament. And it's slightly encouraging MPs the fact that there's a poll out today which shows the Tories are apparently 10 points ahead of Labour, even though the government's about to fall.
Although she was quite far ahead last time, right? And didn't serve her too well in the general election. Look, guys, we're waiting for this vote to come in now. We can see MPs filing back into the Commons. It can't be too long away. But let's just remind you of the amount of persuasion that's gone on today, trying to get MPs to vote for this deal. This is the Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, speaking earlier on in that debate.
What came through, Mr. Speaker, in the statement this morning is, if I can quote the attorney, legal advice can only inform a political decision. And tonight the House faces a political decision. We have a strong message from our business community that wants certainty. We have a message from our citizens who want to know their rights are protected. We are a country that stands by its legal obligations, which is why we will settle the financial settlement. But the reality, Mr. Speaker, that we face a fork in the road. It is time to choose. It is time to support this deal. It's time for our country to move forward. I commend the motion to the House.
OK, well, despite all that persuasion, perhaps the death knell was when Geoffrey Cox signed that letter today, the Attorney General effectively sealing Theresa May's fate, saying that he couldn't change his legal advice. And Henry and Katie are still with me, and that did seem as if it was the moment when all hopes were kind of crushed for Theresa May, right?
Well, I think it was very difficult. He's basically said the advice was unchanged, that there was a chance that we could ultimately be stuck in the backstop. But I think if you actually gave the advice a fair read, there was quite a lot of hope for Brexiteers. So a lot of the Eurosceptic concern was that we could be unfairly trapped in the backstop by the EU, that whatever we put forward, the EU would say, no, we're not interested. I think his advice actually confirmed that that wasn't possible. But, of course, it came very late. MPs felt bounced. Jacob Rees-Mogg made a very big point of saying, I think quite fairly, that they hadn't had time to consider the new advice.
And some talk of a bit of a bust-up between the Attorney General and Downing Street, potentially. They were very much hoping he would change his advice.
I think there was an anger within government in some quarters at the way the advice was dished out. I don't think anyone expected Geoffrey Cox to change his legal opinion. He is a QC, he has a reputation, but I think there was a view amongst some in the Cabinet that the way he wrote that advice was particularly damaging, and some of the lines in it were very quickly weaponised. And then there was a Cabinet this morning when Geoffrey Cox had the task of telling all the ministers that he was going to say he couldn't change his legal advice. I don't think it went down that well, though he did make the point he was up till 5 a.m. writing it, which I think some of them didn't think was that applause-worthy.
OK, well, look, we think we might be getting the vote fairly soon. We can see the Commons just filling up there. Now you can see MPs trooping back into the Commons. Doesn't look as though we're quite at the moment just yet when they'll be delivering that vote. You'll know because MPs will line up just in front of the Speaker, in front of the dispatch box there, and that means they're ready to declare the results. So perhaps maybe another 5 minutes to go on this vote. We'll bring you that vote live in just a few minutes' time, but let's just give you the other side of this debate now, because of course Labour have been arguing all the way through this process that they would like a different kind of deal to this. The one certainty that we have tonight is that they will be voting against the Prime Minister's deal, and this is what the shadow Brexit Secretary had to say in that debate earlier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to end with this. I've been in this role as Shadow Brexit Secretary for 2.5 years. It often feels longer. Many predictions were possible back then, but I could not possibly have foreseen the scale of the calamity now upon us. The truth is the Prime Minister spent 24 months negotiating the deal, but the deal arrived at is a desperate attempt to keep her divided party together, and it's failed even in that endeavour. And I believe it will be rejected by this House. Now, this is a difficult moment for this House and for the country, and we in this House should take no joy in the events that have unfolded. But after tonight, the House will need to come together and find a way out of the mess that the Prime Minister and this government have created.
OK, well, of course, some big questions for Labour tonight too. It hasn't always been clear exactly what their next Brexit steps would be. And, Katie, I suppose the question to Keir Starmer, certainly to Jeremy Corbyn, is going to be, are they now going to move towards a second referendum if this deal is defeated as we expect?
Yes, and there was some thought or expectation that they might try and add an amendment to this deal, which would say something like, we want a second referendum on Labour's deal, a Brexit deal. They decided not to do that, and some of the reason for that is at the moment we don't think there are the numbers in the House for a second referendum. I think it's fair to say that within the Labour Party there's varying degrees of enthusiasm at the idea. Jeremy Corbyn, even though he has changed his party's policy, hasn't really spoken about it in a particularly enthusiastic manner. Keir Starmer, the Shadow Brexit Secretary, has. So I think it remains an awkward issue for them. I don't think you're about to see them campaigning heavily for one, but they're trying to keep their members on side who do want it. So the thing is, though, if Theresa May is voted down heavily tonight, that does put on pressure on Labour to come up with an alternative solution. Yeah. So they are going to have to work out if they really want to push for the second referendum or tap back to Labour's version of a Brexit deal.
And actually, we had expected Labour to put a bit of pressure on Tory backbenchers, Henry, because the fear that was supposed to be swirling around those backbenchers was if they didn't back the Prime Minister's deal tonight, they'd be facing either no Brexit through a second referendum or a no-deal Brexit. And yet, it doesn't seem as though that threat has really carried any weight.
I think Anna Soubry accused Jeremy Corbyn of not even mentioning a second referendum in his speech earlier, and that just shows, I think, how lukewarm their interest is. Well, of course, there's some very loud People's Vote campaigners behind us, but I don't think that's actually transferred into parliamentary sport. And we think that even if Jeremy Corbyn did come down and fully back a second referendum, that it would still be between 50 and 70 MPs short in the House of Commons. And that's part of the problem here. There is no majority for any Brexit solution, including no Brexit.
Okay, well, look, it looks as though we're getting pretty close now to getting the result of this vote. Pretty full House of Commons. I think maybe a couple more minutes. I've seen enough of these votes to know when it's imminent, and it looks as though the benches are still a little bit empty, perhaps a few more MPs still to file in. I'll just be a bit mean to you guys. Any predictions? If you had to pick a figure tonight, what do you think the margin of defeat, assuming it is defeat, will be?
Well, we have seen some Brexiteers come round, even though the legal advice isn't up to it. I don't think it's enough, but I think she might have a defeat of around 140. The government would definitely like it to be a lot lower, and anything above that I think gets a bit disastrous.
Henry, about 150 as well. This is that sort of ballpark. I mean, it's difficult to tell exactly. There's reports that David Davis, obviously a former Brexit secretary who resigned over her Brexit policy, is now backing the deal. That's a very big win. And I think there was also a YouGov poll out today showing that Tory voters and Leavers want MPs to support the deal. So there is a sense that things are beginning to shift, but perhaps not enough in Parliament tonight.
And interesting to see too how many Labour MPs back the deal. I mean, John Mann, they think they've got him in the bag, for example, Labour MP for Basildor, of course, has been quite vocal about the importance of delivering Brexit. Some Labour MPs feel a lot of pressure to vote for this deal, get it over the line.
Right.
I think when it comes to those Labour votes this morning, there was light optimism in government, like they could maybe do this, and that was because you needed a domino effect. And if it looked close, we'll start to get a lot more Labour votes. Number 10 think there are about 30 Labour MPs who could vote for this deal. We don't think we're going to see that level tonight because it doesn't look close enough. If Number 10 can get close, perhaps on a meaningful vote free, if Theresa May makes it that far, you could start to see Labour MPs put their reputation on the line and get behind it.
There's so much interesting psychology around all of this, because another Labour MP said to me today, look, why would I vote for this deal? And this is someone who has a Brexit supporting constituency. Why would I vote for this deal when actually it looks like we'll get an extension to Article 50 if the deal falls, and then we can campaign for a Labour deal potentially. So there are all sorts of different machinations going on here, and it's very difficult to predict exactly how things will go. But I think the key moment today, apart from the Attorney General's advice, was clearly, Henry, when the DUP came out. They are now the weather vane in all of this.
Absolutely. And I think so the DUP did get some of the assurances they were looking for, particularly that the Good Friday Agreement wasn't cut across by the backstop. But equally, they didn't feel it was enough. And I think they were quite careful to say that they couldn't support the deal at this time, which implied that they could well in future. But of course, the EU is also saying, no more, that's it, the negotiations are finally finished. This is the last tweak you can have. So, but of course, we'll see if that's really the case over the next few days.
And that will be one of the defining memories, really, of this whole Brexit debate, is that a lot of it has come down to how the DUP wish to vote on an issue now. They do sort of lead the direction of the Conservative Party. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, I think the DUP were crucial to Theresa May having even a small chance of passing this deal. Because the Tories rely on the DUP to stay in power and function on a daily basis, if you lose their support permanently because you pass a deal they don't like, that scares a lot of MPs. They think that's the way you
just seen the just interrupted that, Katie. We've just seen the Prime Minister walk into the chamber. She's wearing this sort of pinky red jacket today, so you should be able to spot her on the front benches just in front of the dispatch blocks on the left-hand side. I'm pretty sure that was the Prime Minister anyway, looking here on the monitor in Westminster. So that there looks to be... I thought it was the Chief Whip, but it's not. No, it's actually the DUP's Ian Paisley heading to his position. But this does look now as though the vote is imminent. MPs are neatly lined up, ready to listen to the result. You'll know it's coming because the Speaker will give a big yell, and 4 MPs will line up in front of the dispatch box and do a little nodding game, step forward, pull out a piece of paper, and one of them will declare the result. It looks as though we may be getting to that position any moment now. You're keeping us in suspense tonight, Katie.
And the big question is, what does Theresa May say immediately after that? Because that's when we think she might try and perhaps not pull the rabbit out of the hat, but try and salvage something back from what is we're expecting to be a rather humiliating result.
Well, one of your colleagues is saying that she's just walked in, Katie, with a tight speech in her hand. We can't quite see that, but I was looking down on Twitter. And,
Zoom.
So clearly she's ready to say something.
She's worked out her next steps then, and just to add that we do expect that reaction immediately after the vote. So the vote will be delivered. There'll be presumably a point of order, as they call it in the Commons, a chance for the Prime Minister to stand up and to make her case for what ought to happen next. And that is what all MPs will be listening to tonight, because we have absolutely no idea what the Prime Minister will do next. We may suspect that she's going for a meaningful vote 3, that she wants to try and push this to the wire at the EU summit next week. We don't know whether she might have a more drastic plan up her sleeve, maybe tack towards Labour's plan of having a customs union to try and win over the opposition. Who knows, she might call the general election. You never know with this Prime Minister. She really could take a whole host of measures after this vote tonight. So all eyes on the tellers whenever they choose to come into the Commons. I suppose the other thing that was really interesting today, Henry, was how the ERG itself has begun to split, because they've had such a slick whipping operation all the way through this, almost like a party within a party, and yet today we saw the first fissures really in it.
I think that was very important. I think, as we were saying before, David Davis moving his position was quite crucial. The ERG have divisions. Some are keen to find ladders to climb down, others are looking for crosses to martyrise themselves on and sort of put in pursuit of a perfect Brexit. So it's not a uniform position, and we're seeing that split probably continue to deepen over the next few weeks as we become more and more unclear about our future Brexit policy.
And in the long term, that's quite an interesting pattern for the Conservative Party itself, because there have been these rumours that, if Theresa May does tack towards a Labour deal, she could split the Conservative Party. But actually, if you've got the ERG divided within themselves, maybe that's not such a clear divide after all.
Yeah, I think if we start to see the Brexiters split, as we did today, you could fall into those that are seen to be less idealistic and those that are more hardline. And I think that is an interesting distinction as we go on. We had the ERG meeting this evening where they tried to come up with a voting strategy, and they were clear that they still think the majority are voting this deal down, but they did admit that a significant number are either abstaining or voting for. And that's partly because there are some who do fear that if they don't vote for this, you won't get Brexit, and they think that people will blame them, not just the forces of Remain.
OK, well, look, we're hoping for the result. Just to recap here, we're waiting for the result of the second meaningful vote on the Prime Minister's Brexit deal after a last-minute dash to Strasbourg last night, where she managed to squeeze some assurances out of EU leaders that that backstop would not be permanent, though those assurances were not enough to persuade her Attorney General that they significantly altered the deal itself. He had to trot out his legal advice today that he still felt there was no guarantee that we wouldn't be stuck in that backstop permanently, and that has altered all hopes of Theresa May getting this deal through this evening, because MPs are now looking as though they will vote it down for a second time. I don't think I've been left in quite this much suspense before. I don't know why this vote is taking so long.
Still no
It's pretty
tellers.
speedy. What is it now? 7:20. They started voting around 7. You'd expect them to actually be reaching a conclusion just about now.
Getting very full.
They've been standing there for quite some time. And Katie, the interesting thing tonight is that it might feel a bit like deja vu. We've seen a lot of these votes lately, but actually she's running out of a lot of road now, the Prime Minister, isn't she? She's running out of options, and it does feel as though this vote is more crucial than those that have come before it.
Yeah, you speak to anyone in government and no one tries to put on a brave face or give you a positive spin. People just say, this is terrible, we have no idea what happens.
Oh, just a second, we've got the speaker talking here. So the Speaker looks as though he is investigating a delay in this vote. I did say that it's taking a little longer than it would normally take, which is leaving us in great suspense here in Westminster. I can't imagine what that delay might be. It's very unusual, isn't it? It looks as though the clerks are trying to make their way into the chamber there.
We're gonna have to
Somebody's
have a
pushing
recap.
it. Oh, are these the tellers making their way through, do you think? Right, this looks as though
It's happening.
Something weird.
we now have the tellers ready to declare the result of the vote. Let's listen into events in the chamber.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 242. The noes to the left, 391.
The ayes to the right, 242. The noes to the left, 391. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock! Order. Point of order, the Prime Minister.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, I profoundly regret the decision that this House has taken tonight. I continue to believe that by far the best outcome is that the United Kingdom leaves the European Union in an orderly fashion with a deal. And that the deal we've negotiated is the best and indeed the only deal available. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like to set out briefly how the government means to proceed. 2 weeks ago, I made a series of commitments from this dispatch box regarding the steps we would take in the event that this House rejected the deal on offer. I stand by those commitments in full. Therefore, tonight we will table a motion for debate tomorrow to test whether the House supports leaving the European Union without a deal on the 29th of March. The Leader of the House will shortly make an emergency business statement confirming the change to tomorrow's business. This is an issue of grave importance for the future of our country. Just like the referendum, there are strongly held and equally legitimate views on both sides. For that reason, I can confirm that this will be a free vote on this side of the House. And I have personally struggled with this choice, as I'm sure many other honourable members will. I'm passionate about delivering the result of the referendum, but I equally passionately believe that the best way to do that is to leave in an orderly way with a deal. And I still believe that there is a majority in the House for that course of action. And I'm conscious also of my duties as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of the potential damage to the Union that leaving without a deal could do when one part of our country is without devolved governance. I can therefore confirm that the motion will read that this House declines to approve leaving the European Union without a withdrawal agreement and a framework on the future relationship on the 29th of March 2019, and notes that leaving without a deal remains the default in UK and EU law unless this House and the EU ratify an agreement. I will return to the House to open the debate tomorrow and to take interventions from honourable members, and to ensure the House is fully informed in making this historic decision. The Government will tomorrow publish information on essential policies which would need to be put in place if we were to leave without a deal. These will cover our approach to tariffs and the Northern Ireland border, among other matters. If the House votes to leave without a deal on the 29th of March, it will be the policy of the Government to implement that decision. If the House declines to approve leaving without a deal on the 29th of March, the Government will, following that vote, bring forward a motion on Thursday on whether Parliament wants to seek an extension to Article 50. If the House votes for an extension, the Government will seek to agree that extension with the EU and bring forward the necessary legislation to change the exit date commensurate with that extension. But let me be clear. Voting against leaving without a deal and for an extension does not solve the problems we face. The EU will want to know what use we mean to make of such an extension, and this House will have to answer that question. Does it wish to revoke Article 50? Does it want to hold a second referendum? Does it want to leave with a deal but not this deal? These are unenviable choices. But thanks to the decision that the House has made this evening, they are choices that must now be faced.
Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has been defeated again by an enormous majority, and they must now accept their deal, their proposal, the one the Prime Minister has put, is clearly dead and does not have the support of this House. And quite clearly, no deal must be taken off the table. We've said that before, and we'll say that again. But it does mean the House has got to come together with a proposal that could be negotiated. The Labour Party has put that proposal, and we will put that proposal again, because the dangers of what the Prime Minister is proposing are basically that she carries on threatening us all with the danger of no deal, the danger of that, knowing full well the damage that will do to the British economy. This party will put forward our proposals again, which are about a negotiated customs union, access to the market and protection of rights. Those are the ones we'll put forward. We believe there may well be a majority for them, but there will also be the potential of negotiating them. The Prime Minister has run down the clock, and the clock has been run out on her. Maybe it's time instead we had a general election and the people could choose who their government should be.
Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a humiliating defeat for the government this evening, and this deal should not come back in any way, shape, form again. Mr. Speaker.
OK, so just to recap on what we've seen there in the House of Commons, the Prime Minister's deal defeated for a second time, this time by 149 votes, so a little bit less than last time. That was 230, but still in three figures, way into three figures. That is a far worse defeat than Downing Street had hoped for. They were expecting a defeat, they had factored it in, and then crucially, in that statement from the Prime Minister this evening, you have heard the Prime Minister say that tomorrow's vote, ruling out no deal potentially, will be a free vote. That means that MPs can vote any way they like. There will be no pressure from the Conservative Party for them to vote in a particular way. That is huge news for the Prime Minister's cabinet. There will be some in there absolutely furious that the Prime Minister is effectively allowing MPs to take no deal off the table. And then you heard the Prime Minister talk about the next steps. So on Thursday, there will be a vote on extending Article 50. And again, huge news in there from the Prime Minister that there will be various options, she admits, on the road ahead, including potentially a second referendum or a different kind of Brexit deal. Well, let's get some reaction to this immediately now. We've got the Conservative MP, Charles Walker, standing by for us in Central Lobby. And Charles Walker, you have been a supporter of Brexit, so I'm guessing this evening you weren't able to vote for that deal, but you tell me how you voted.
I voted for every deal for Brexit, and I was in the division lobby with the Prime Minister tonight. The EU isn't going to go through the subtleties of those who are in the no lobby. They'll just see 350, whatever it was, members of Parliament voting against Brexit. I just simply can't understand what's happening now. It's beyond me.
Do you think that the ERG and those in your party who voted against this deal tonight have effectively thrown away Brexit now? Because we heard the Prime Minister say there will be this vote tomorrow on ruling out no deal, and potentially we're looking at an extension of Article 50 and anything could happen.
Well, I've always said that no leave is much more likely than no deal. We have a country that voted to leave the EU, and we have a Parliament that, if it was entirely honest, and each member of Parliament was entirely honest, voted to remain. So the Remainers now have the whip hand.
What do you think the reaction will be within your party to this news that there will be a free vote tomorrow?
Well, I don't know anymore, really. I'm sorry if I sound. This is territory that I'm not familiar with. I've been a member of Parliament for 14 years.
You sound pretty depressed
this is
tonight,
just new
Charles
territory
Walker.
For everyone.
You sound pretty depressed tonight.
Sorry?
If I might. You sound pretty depressed and deflated tonight, I might say so.
Well, I don't sound pretty depressed. I am pretty depressed. With a Conservative government, we're here to govern. We're here to make decisions. We're here to make difficult decisions. Most members of Parliament beyond the SNP and a few others stood on a manifesto to deliver the result of the referendum. And bizarrely, 350 plus have decided not to deliver the result of the referendum tonight. Now, I really don't understand how this works anymore. It's just very, very peculiar. Because I say this, no leave is just so much more likely than no deal. And we're staring down that barrel right now. And then, of course, next week, Oliver Letwin, who I have huge regard for, Nicholas Bowles, Yvette Cooper, all wonderful people who I happen to disagree with, are going to try and seize control from the government and turn Parliament into the executive, which no government will allow, which is why today I've been saying almost the inevitable outcome is a general election. I haven't been calling for a general election. I don't want a general election, but it's not what I want. It's not what I call for. It's where this takes us, and it is almost now inevitable that we will have a general election called in days or a week or so.
And do you think it's possible for Theresa May to lead us into that general election? Do you think it is now time for a change of party leader?
Well, of course she'd have to. No. Theresa May would have to leave us in. We're meant to be leaving the EU in 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks. You know, we haven't got time for a leadership contest or any of the niceties like that. This is the country we're talking about. To hell with the Conservative Party. This is the country, and to hell with the Conservative Party's internal workings. The Prime Minister is fast approaching a position where she will have to go and seek a new mandate from the country, and whether colleagues like that or not, or approve of that or not, is now almost becoming irrelevant, because that is one of the only options she has left to her.
What else do you think the Prime Minister could do next? I mean, in an ideal world, what do you want her to do next?
Well, and we don't live in an ideal world. The ideal world does not exist. That's why we have politics. If we had an ideal world, we wouldn't need politicians. I suppose you can have one more attempt to bring it back. I suspect there's a chance, if Parliament, as it will do because it's a free vote, rules out no deal tomorrow, quite a few members of the ERG and the DUP might decide, well, OK, it's now time to get in line. So there is a chance that there could be a rerun of this next week, but that's just a remote chance, I think.
OK, all right. Charles Walker, Conservative MP, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Let's get some reaction now from Brussels too, because of course this is a two-sided negotiation, and the EU was hoping that this deal would pass this evening after giving Britain some concessions, and our correspondent Angus Walker is there for us. So what on earth does Brussels say to all this tonight, Angus?
Well, they've been watching through their hands. They've been glued to their televisions as well, and a coordinated response from President Juncker at the EU Commission and President Tusk at the EU Council, with their team sending out a message. I've just received a text from both their offices, and it's striking that the messages are almost identical, so a very coordinated response, as you expect perhaps. But just picking through quite a long statement from both those senior EU figures. They say if there is a solution to the current situation, it has to be found in London. What they're saying is, we are now sitting back. You in Westminster need to sort yourselves out. We can no longer help you. And we heard that message from President Juncker delivered at the press conference with Theresa May in Strasbourg last night, when he said there can be no third chance. In other words, no more negotiations. This is it. We're not going to see Theresa May come back here now and be given more concessions. They are standing firm on that. And also, they say in their statements they are now preparing for no deal. The preparations will be for all scenarios, they say. And then on the matter of the extension, they say, should there be a reasoned request, they stand ready to consider it. It would need unanimous agreement from the EU 27 member states for an extension to be granted. From people I've been speaking to over the last few months, there shouldn't be a problem with that. And in fact, the idea of an extension has been the talk of the town since November, December, when the withdrawal agreement first got a pretty lukewarm reaction back in Westminster. And the statement goes on to say the EU 27 will decide, giving priority to the need to ensure the functioning of EU institutions in terms of the length of any extension. And what they mean there is, of course, there are European Parliament elections in May, and the question of how long an extension can be is going to be determined to some extent by the timetable for those elections.
And Angus, the interesting thing listening to the Prime Minister tonight, of course, is that she has set out some potential options of what that extension could be used for. She mentioned a second referendum, not suggesting for a moment that she wants one, but she certainly mentioned it. She mentioned a different kind of deal. What do you think Brussels' preference would be? How would they want her to use that extension if indeed they are going to grant it?
There's always been the suggestion here that the EU would prefer a softer type of Brexit. So to a certain extent, I think privately, officials and diplomats will say, well, this could play our way, and we could end up with a Brexit which involves much closer alignment with the single market and customs union, which they believe would be better economically for the existing members of the European Union. But also that sort of outcome would send a very strong message to other members that, look, even Britain, which voted to leave, ended up in a very close trading relationship with us, and it helps enhance the benefits to other members. It's vindication of the European project, as it were.
All right, thank you, Angus, in Brussels. Thanks very much. Let's get some more reaction in Westminster to that vote now. And joining me is Francis Grove-White, who's campaigning for a People's Vote, and Richard Tice, the co-chair of Leave Means Leave, a Brexit group that wants us to get on with Brexit. So, Richard Tice, I'll start with you. I mean, what do you make of the result of this vote tonight? You must be pretty disappointed that
Not at all. I'm delighted.
Brexit's slipping from your hands,
Not
isn't
at
it?
all. Far from it. You know, the good news is that MPs have quite rightly rejected the worst deal in history, so that's good news. What they should now do tomorrow is vote to keep no deal on the table.
There's almost no chance of them doing that.
Well, let's wait and see. The mood of the country is moving rapidly towards no deal. We've got a YouGov poll of 2,000 people out today. The highest percentage, 37%, want a no deal.
So that's where the mood of the country. No deal means no Brexit.
What's really important is that MPs understand where the mood of the country is. People are bored of it. They've got confidence in our nation, and MPs should believe in Britain as well. Let's get this done. Let's leave. Then we save 39 billion and we can run our economy as we see fit, rather than be dictated to by Brussels. It's a great opportunity. These MPs now need to have some confidence in our country.
And Francis, the Prime Minister name-checked a second referendum as a potential option on the table. I'm not suggesting, as I keep saying, that she's supporting one, but she threw it out there as an option. I mean, that must, for you, sound encouraging.
Well, we've known that a referendum is one of the most likely scenarios out of this whole mess. There's a lot of quite unlikely scenarios, but one of them at some point is going to come to pass. Personally, I don't think it will be no deal. I think no deal will be taken off the table again by Parliament. It's quite clear there's not a majority in Parliament. We hear the Prime Minister has announced she's going to put it to a free vote. Say what you like about that. I think she's putting party management above all else by not whipping against no deal. I find it quite extraordinary that the Prime Minister could be doing that, and I wonder how she's going to vote herself. Presumably she's going to have to find herself on an urgent trip to Brussels or some far-flung corner of the world, because she's going to have a very difficult decision to make about how she votes in that. But I think a referendum is it's one of the options that is going to emerge over the coming days.
But in reality, if there's an extension to Article 50, if I'm wrong, if MPs vote to take no deal off the table, actually the European elections come before a second referendum, and we're totally convinced that essentially a new Brexit party would sweep the board in that European elections and essentially act as a proxy to take a second referendum off the table.
And actually, if you were so confident that people want a second referendum, Francis, you could have brought an amendment this evening, but you know full well there's no majority for it at the moment in the House of Commons.
Well, look, there's no majority for anything at the moment in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister's deal, the second time of asking, after she got every single last concession she could squeeze out of Brussels in Strasbourg last night, still fell 150 votes short. Jeremy Corbyn's plan for a customs union is by no means a likely option at the moment. Norway plus. No deal is absolutely not a likely option in Parliament at the moment. I think at some point, People's Vote is not one of these options. It's the solution to the crisis. It's the way out. And at some point that's going to become clear, whether it's to the Prime Minister or the majority of MPs in that place. And at some point, I think it's going to have its time at some point.
And Richard Tice, I mean, it must be disappointing for you to hear the Prime Minister say that there will be a free vote tomorrow on no deal, because that presumably means the Conservative Party will split and there will be a majority that rules out no deal tomorrow.
Well, look, let's wait and see. We're delighted with the result today. We just asked these MPs, why haven't you got the confidence in our great nation that actually your voters, your constituents clearly have around the country? Because that's the mood of the country. Get it done. Let's go WTO. Let's say 39 billion.
Come on now, Richard, you're a businessman and you must speak to other business people. And you know that they don't want no deal. The majority of businesses don't want no deal.
That is simply not true.
You think a majority of businesses want no deal?
Because
no question of a majority of businesses wanting it.
Are you going to listen to my answer or not? 90% of British businesses do not export to the European Union. Right? They want to get this done, get the uncertainty out of it. It's less than 10% that export to the European Union. Why are we burdening the 90% just for the less than 10%?
Hold on, 45% of our exports go to the European Union.
By about 6% of our companies.
But it's
13% of our GDP.
The number of jobs linked to our trade with the EU, the intricate supply chains up and down the country, not to mention the travel networks, the food supplies, the medicines.
It's 13% of our GDP.
The border in Northern Ireland.
Project Fear was completely wrong the first time.
It's
not reckless at all.
It's absurd.
Because we talk to businesses up and down the country. They've got confidence in their abilities to work things through. You know, the majority of businesses don't export. They're not affected by this. All this scaremongering by Westminster, by the media, by various campaigns is nonsense. People are getting on with it, and constantly we continue to outperform.
Loose-lipped.
So we outperformed Germany, France. Nonsense. We outperformed Germany, France, and Italy last year.
Into this place
We're
in
employing
2016.
600,000 more people than we did 3 years ago. People out in the country have confidence in our nation. MPs should do the same.
OK, all right, well, let's speak to an MP now. Thank you very much, both of you, for that rather lively debate. Richard and Francis, thanks for joining us this evening. But let's go back to MPs. They are the focus of tonight's story. And in central lobby for us, we have Heidi Allen, once a Conservative MP, but more recently a member of the Independent Group. Good evening to you, Heidi. What do you make of tonight's events, and what should the Prime Minister do next?
Well, the vote we always knew would be lost. I must admit it's bigger again as it was than I expected. I also thought that last time. What was interesting, and I'm slightly encouraged by the Prime Minister's response, certainly not Jeremy Corbyn's, because yet again he's still sitting on the fence, unable to come out for a second referendum despite the wishes of his MPs and his party. But the Prime Minister did sound to me, she struggled through, but at the end was very clear about Parliament now needs to say what we do next. It's a free vote tomorrow on no deal to take that off the table. And then on Thursday we get to vote about extending Article 50 and talking about either a different deal, or she mentioned people's vote as well. So I'm actually quite encouraged. I think there's an opportunity here.
It was interesting to hear the Prime Minister mention a second referendum. I think that's the first time we've heard her suggest that this is an option in a sentence that isn't wholly negative. Do you see any change in mood in the government? Have you had any conversations with ministers in the past few days about the potential of moving to a people's vote or a second referendum, as it sometimes known?
No, I think those conversations will start tomorrow morning, and some of us are already making that, so those sorts of appointments, if you like. We're getting those in place for the morning. We always knew it would be like this. People's vote was always going to be last chance saloon. That right to vote was never going to be something that a lot of MPs would voluntarily sign up to, but those of us that have been backing it for a while knew that this was a kind of a logical conclusion of where we'd end up, and it's looking more and more likely that that's going to now be the way that we get out of this mess.
It would take a considerable amount of time to organise a second referendum, people's vote, whatever you want to call it. And yesterday the EU was clear that they would only give us an extension until the end of May unless we want to hold European elections. So are you saying you would be willing to hold those European elections in order to organise a second referendum?
Well, that potentially is what would need to happen. I mean, the EU have always been pretty straightforward about they won't give us, a technical extension, 2 or 3 months is fine, but a longer extension, which we would need, would be for some very, very different approach, whether it's a completely different type of deal, a Norway Plus type deal, or a second referendum. We reckon we can get the time for a second referendum down with government backing to 15 weeks. So we don't see any need to drag this out beyond that, and certainly for the British people to get some stability back and some sense of where we're going to end up. We think we could have it done really towards the autumn time. There's no need to delay it beyond that.
But a 15-week extension would involve going into those European elections, and you may well be facing the risk of a Brexit party sweeping those European elections. Such would be the frustration of those who voted leave, with the fact that they would perceive you as frustrating the will of the people. Are you sure you know what you're getting yourself into here?
What, with the second referendum?
Absolutely, the second referendum and the risk that you go into those European elections and allow a Brexit party potentially to sweep the board.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the case. And this debate is as much about our domestic politics here and our voters in this country as it is just a European debate. But, more and more polling is showing every single day that constituencies up and down the country The people of this country understand significantly more now about what this deal might look like and the effect it will have on their lives. And more polling is suggesting that people in this country want an opportunity to decide whether they want this deal or not. So a people's vote is certainly gathering momentum and approval within the British public, and on that basis, I think it's absolutely the right thing to do.
Just lastly, I mean, you have been quite loyal to the Prime Minister since you left the party. You've never launched a personal attack on Theresa May. But do you think she has any credibility left? Do you think she has any authority left? Should she resign as Prime Minister at this point?
I think it all depends on how she responds in the next 48 hours. I mean, nobody could have failed but be impressed and moved by her performance at the dispatch box today. You know, she is absolutely exhausted. She has put her heart and soul into negotiating this deal, and I am still of that opinion. The problem is, throughout, she's extended the art of compromise to the wrong people, to the ERG and to the DUP, instead of the sensible soft Brexiteers which exist right across the House of Commons. So in terms of her remaining as Prime Minister, I think that depends on how she reacts. She needs to drop those red lines now and either people's vote for her deal, to put it to British people, or to seek a different kind of deal across the House. So it really is in her hands.
OK, all right. Heidi Allen, Independent MP, thanks very much for joining us this evening. And here with me now is the political editor of ITV, Ken Reid. Good to see you, Ken. And look, Ken, you've been covering Northern Irish politics for years now, and what is absolutely fascinating about what's emerged today was that the DUP effectively led the way, didn't they? They were the weather vane today that effectively told us the direction in which the Conservative Party was moving on this vote.
Well, they knew quite quickly, once they saw the advice of the Attorney General, Sir Geoffrey Cox, they decided, no, this wasn't enough, that really they needed more certainty on the backstop. And of course, when the DUP said that, they immediately talked to the ERG, and you could see the thing was going to snowball. And I think once the DUP had decided that they were not on board for this, then the Prime Minister had basically no chance of winning tonight.
What do you think they want now, the DUP? Because it looks as though there'll be, well, we know there'll be a free vote tomorrow now, no whipped vote tomorrow or no deal. What do they want?
Well, I think it's also significant, and it's probably gone unnoticed largely. The Prime Minister also talked tonight that tomorrow there will be plans published in the event of a no-deal Brexit, what it would mean for the border, and indeed what the tariffs would be across the border. Now, that's highly significant because we know that the backstop is there to try and stop hard borders in Northern Ireland. I will have to see the detail, but I think that's another throw of the dice, trying to say to people in Northern Ireland, look, here are the implications if we don't get a deal at some stage.
Because how do you think the DUP will vote tomorrow on a no-deal Brexit? Will they back it? Will they vote against it?
Well, I think there'll be a lot of discussion tonight in the DUP. People like Sammy Wilson have always said that they shouldn't be afraid of a no-deal. Others in the party perhaps are not quite so sure, but the DUP generally operates as one. You don't see splits when it comes to votes. If it's a free vote in the DUP, then perhaps that would change things. But I do think tomorrow that they will talk about it tomorrow morning. I wouldn't be surprised if they voted for a no deal.
Fascinating. All right, Ken Reid, always good to get your insight. Thanks very much for joining me. Let's go back to Central Lobby now, because we have the Labour MP, Lucy Powell, joining us this evening. And Lucy Powell, you have suggested that the way forward in the past would be to go for a different kind of Brexit deal, Common Market 2.0, as you call it. So what do you want the Prime Minister to do next?
Well, obviously we're going to have the vote tomorrow on no deal. I think that won't pass. Parliament doesn't want to have no deal, and then we'll have an extension of some kind. And I think what the Prime Minister indicated this evening, and what I really hope she now fulfills so that we don't have to force her to, is to find a way for Parliament to express its preference about the way forward, the direction of travel. And I think my proposal, it's supported by a large cross-party group of MPs, Common Market 2.0, will attract a lot of support from across the House, Leavers and Remainers, Labour and Conservative. And I'm pretty confident that when we're given the opportunity, that's the sort of Brexit that could command a majority in Parliament, and then it's for the government to take that mandate and go back to the EU during that extension period and rewrite the political declaration along those lines.
OK, I mean, effectively what you're proposing is a model a little bit like Norway's, and actually there are many concerns across the House about that model. For example, it wouldn't give us full control of immigration. So are you absolutely confident there would be a majority for a deal like that? Because it doesn't appear at the moment that there is one.
Well, I think there would be, because actually for many, many years, right up to and including the referendum, the Norway model was what the Leave campaigners always proposed, from Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson and the others. And that's why it still attracts a lot of support from people that campaigned for and supported Leave in the referendum, because yes, free movement in one sense would continue, but outside of the EU we would unilaterally be allowed to bring into play an emergency brake on free movement, and also within the European Economic Area, which is what we're proposing, it's not the free movement of people, it's the free movement of workers. And these are two key issues which actually David Cameron sought to get as concessions from the EU ahead of the referendum. So it's not total control of our borders, but they are significant changes to what we have at the moment.
How long do you envisage it would take to negotiate a deal like this? Because the EU said yesterday if we have an extension, it's got to be up until the end of May before we crash into European elections. Any extension longer than that would involve sending MEPs back to Brussels, back to Strasbourg. So what are you talking about in terms of a timescale for negotiating your kind of deal?
Well, the good thing about what we're proposing is it's off the shelf. There are already countries like Norway and Iceland and others that sit in the EFTA, the free trade area, and in the EEA. So the institutions exist, the treaties exist, the model already exists. So it would be much more straightforward than any other kind of bespoke deal that we'd be looking to negotiate. And Brussels has said for many, many months that this is the kind of arrangement they would be happy with. The critical thing about what we're proposing actually is that it still requires the withdrawal agreement of the Prime Ministers, but it's fundamentally changing and rewriting the political declaration. So there would have to be a withdrawal agreement passed by Parliament in the next few weeks, but we would have changed the political declaration to something that we know we could more quickly negotiate than any of the other options on the table at the moment.
All eyes are on the Labour Party now in terms of the front bench and what direction the party chooses to take in terms of a second referendum. How are you feeling right now about the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn potentially tacking now and saying, "Yep, let's go for it, let's have a people's vote"?
Well, I mean, he didn't say that. He didn't say that this evening because, look, I think I totally understand why people are calling for another referendum, but I think what's becoming increasingly clear was that even if there was a majority in Parliament for that, which there isn't, we still need to resolve what we would be putting to the people in terms of the Leave proposition, like what does Brexit actually look like? And we haven't resolved that. Tonight we have resoundingly said no to her deal, so we couldn't put her deal to a referendum. We've still got to decide what it is we would actually be putting to the referendum. So that's something perhaps for a later point in this argument, and I think that's why Jeremy made that clear this evening.
OK, Lucy Powell, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And back with me now is Henry Newman, Director of Open Europe and a former advisor to Michael Gove. And we haven't caught up with you since we got the result of the vote earlier. An absolutely incredible defeat for the Prime Minister. What does she do next?
Well, you said, what did I think it was going to be? I said 150 and I was one out. So this is pretty much what we expected, actually. Disappointing, but she needs to now persuade 75 MPs to change their mind, and then she's actually back in business. I know that sounds like a tall order, but it's not impossible still. And as I said before, I think this deal has got a strong chance of coming back, because whatever Lucy Powell is saying, or the others advocating a softer Brexit, I don't think there's a majority there for that in the Commons. And we know also there isn't a majority for a second referendum. Jeremy Corbyn barely mentioned it, or didn't mention it at all in his statement just now. So what is the choice other than another version, another go at this deal, and to try and find a way to persuade the DUP in particular to change their mind? And I think number 10 will look at the results tonight and take some comfort from the fact they managed to persuade a few crucial ERG voices to move over. We saw David Davis, which was expected, voting for the deal, the former Brexit secretary, but also Zach Goldsmith, whose father, of course, ran the referendum campaign, very keen Brexiteer, former mayoral candidate for the Conservatives in London, and Nadine Dorries, another very loud and passionate Brexiteer.
She's been very critical in the past, so that is... There are some wins in there for the Prime Minister, but I thought it was also interesting that she will allow this free vote tomorrow on no deal. I mean, presumably that's going to go down pretty badly with some of the ERG, some of those Brexiteers on the back benches.
Well, absolutely, but equally, I don't know what else she really could do at this point. They've made it impossible for her to get the deal over the line tonight. And equally, I think whipping a vote would well have pulled her cabinet completely apart. It's pretty unprecedented, though, to have a free vote on such a big substantive question. They're normally reserved for questions of conscience or morality.
We all want to know how the Prime Minister's going to vote.
Well, she said she's going to vote against no deal on the 29th of March. So she's been very clear that she doesn't want that. And that, of course, is a bit of a shift in position.
And then the next question is what happens on Thursday. I mean, presumably MPs will vote for an extension of Article 50, but what are they going to use it for? Right,
exactly. And she'll have to go back to Brussels. There's a European Council coming up towards the tail end of next week and ask for that extension. And of course, the EU may not just offer that lightly. They may say that actually all that's on offer is a very long extension. And I think that that will help focus the minds, again, of certain MPs when she can come back after that council meeting at the end of next week and say to the Commons, look, the EU will give us an extension, but it's going to be a long one. It's going to mean European elections. It's going to mean Brexit delayed a very long time. Are you sure you want that? And as the options narrow further, I think her deal has another chance to come back again.
OK, well, look, we're talking about the Prime Minister here. Why don't we play a little recap of what she said earlier on, immediately after that statement. You've got to feel for her a little bit here, whether you love her or loathe her. She has lost her voice this evening. This is what she croaked out in the Commons immediately after that defeat.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, I profoundly regret the decision that this House has taken tonight. I continue to believe that by far the best outcome is that the United Kingdom leaves the European Union in an orderly fashion with a deal. And that the deal we've negotiated is the best and indeed the only deal available. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like to set out briefly how the government means to proceed. 2 weeks ago, I made a series of commitments from this dispatch box regarding the steps we would take in the event that this House rejected the deal on offer. I stand by those commitments in full. Therefore, tonight we will table a motion for debate tomorrow to test whether the House supports leaving the European Union without a deal on the 29th of March. The Leader of the House will shortly make an emergency business statement confirming the change to tomorrow's business. This is an issue of grave importance for the future of our country. Just like the referendum, there are strongly held and equally legitimate views on both sides. For that reason, I can confirm that this will be a free vote on this side of the House. I have personally struggled with this choice, as I'm sure many other honourable members will. I'm passionate about delivering the result of the referendum, but I equally passionately believe that the best way to do that is to leave in an orderly way with a deal. And I still believe that there is a majority in the House for that course of action. And I'm conscious also of my duties as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of the potential damage to the Union that leaving without a deal could do when one part of our country is without devolved governance. I can therefore confirm that the motion will read that this House declines to approve leaving the European Union without a withdrawal agreement and a framework on the future relationship on the 29th of March 2019, and notes that leaving without a deal remains the default in UK and EU law unless this House and the EU ratify an agreement. I will return to the House to open the debate tomorrow and to take interventions from honourable members, and to ensure the House is fully informed in making this historic decision. The Government will tomorrow publish information on essential policies which would need to be put in place if we were to leave without a deal. These will cover our approach to tariffs and the Northern Ireland border, among other matters. If the House votes to leave without a deal on the 29th of March, it will be the policy of the Government to implement that decision. If the House declines to approve leaving without a deal on the 29th of March, the Government will, following that vote, bring forward a motion on Thursday on whether Parliament wants to seek an extension to Article 50. If the House votes for an extension, the Government will seek to agree that extension with the EU and bring forward the necessary legislation to change the exit date commensurate with that extension. But let me be clear. Voting against leaving without a deal and for an extension does not solve the problems we face. The EU will want to know what use we mean to make of such an extension, and this House will have to answer that question. Does it wish to revoke Article 50? Does it want to hold a second referendum? Or does it want to leave with a deal but not this deal? These are unenviable choices. But thanks to the decision that the House has made this evening, they are choices that must now be faced.
Prime Minister speaking there earlier on after that massive defeat in the Commons, a second defeat. Let's go straight to the Shadow Foreign Secretary now, Emily Thornberry, who's standing by for us to give some Labour reaction. And Emily Thornberry, we know the Prime Minister's deal has fallen, so when is your party going to crack on with its conference motion and push for a second referendum?
So what we're going to do is our conference policy is to try to keep all options on the table. And we have been pushing what we think is an entirely sensible alternative Brexit. And she just doesn't listen to us. And she doesn't listen to anybody, let's face it. I mean, you know, if you think about it, 4 months ago we could have been here because nothing has changed, to coin a phrase. She has put forward her deal. She's now put it forward in a different font. It's been rejected again. And we are, how many days out? 17 days? And she just seems to just have no plan B, not complete tin air, and just keep soldiering on. Now, it's very frustrating.
Hang on,
because
there,
we
Emily.
do think there is another way of going forward. Yeah, go.
Well, what is your way forward, though? Because you criticised the Prime Minister and say nothing has changed on her front. What's actually changed on the Labour front? You've been repeating the same position for weeks now. We thought a couple of weeks ago you were moving towards a second referendum. It doesn't seem to be the case.
So, hang on, you've jumped a bit. Because what we have done is that we've written to her and we've said that the type of Brexit that would get a majority in Parliament would be the sort of deal that we've been pressing for. And so that is one whereby we remain in a customs union, we are close to the single market, we have dynamic alignment of rules and regulations, and we remain in organisations, European organisations, that help to keep us safe. We have been saying that for 2 years. But she doesn't listen to us. And what we've also said is that when the music stops, if we end up being stuck with either Theresa May's deal or no deal, then yes, we think that that logjam has to be broken and we need to go back to the people in another referendum. But we do also need, because we do believe that there is another way of leaving the European Union, which is to coin a phrase, a softer Brexit. I mean, in the end, you know, 52-48 means that we leave the European Union, but we really don't need to go very far. And our alternative Brexit plan has been one which has been described as a softer Brexit. It's been accepted by Europe as being an entirely reasonable negotiating position. It's been one that the experts have said, you know, would work, and yet she will not listen to us. And it's immensely frustrating.
Yes,
but you know, we cannot vote for her deal. Her deal makes no sense, and so we will continue to vote against it.
But Emily Thornberry, the House isn't really listening to Labour's plan either. There's no majority or any sign of it at the moment for the Labour's plan for a Brexit deal. So at what point do you accept that your deal is also dead and you move on through that sequencing, promise at your party conference that you would then push for a second referendum?
I think we also need to push for a general election. I think you will have heard when Theresa May was listing all the possibilities of all the things that might happen. I think it was probably me that you heard heckling her and saying, what about a general election? Because, you know, I'm an old-fashioned girl. I just think that if a government can't govern, you should get another government. And that's the way it's always worked. The trouble is that we don't have a written constitution. We've got an unwritten constitution, and basically she's pushing the constitution to its absolute limit. You know, she is Prime Minister, she refuses to leave, she refuses to listen, and she refuses to do anything other than keep pushing, flogging this dead horse that has been dead for 4 months.
OK, so coming back to Labour's plan for its own Brexit deal, how long do you think that would take to negotiate with the EU?
I think that what we can do when we've been talking to them, we have said that this is a basis for, in the end, the way in which we leave the European Union is that we have to have the basis for our ongoing relationship there, and that hangs together as the basis of an ongoing relationship. So it does seem to me that we can extend the period. We will need to extend the period before we leave the European Union. but that we can within, certainly faster, frankly, than she's ever going to get this deal through Parliament, as far as I can see, that we would be able to have a fresh chance of being able to negotiate properly, and it could be done. It could be done. There is
how quickly
goodwill
could it be
on
done?
both
Could it be
sides,
done
and we
before
could
the
get this
European
done.
elections are due in May, for example? Could you get your deal done before we have to elect MEPs
Listen,
again to the European Parliament?
I think we've got so many. Hang on, we've got so many ifs here. How much longer is this government going to keep staggering on? I don't know. How much longer is this Prime Minister going to keep staggering on? I don't know. How much longer is she going to keep flogging the dead horse that is her agreement? I don't know. When will we have a general election? I don't know. But I tell you what, we need one, and we need another government, and we have an alternative plan. Now, I can't in those circumstances tell you, given all the other ifs I've just been through. Hang on, I've just got all these other.
Emily Thornberry, how long would it take you to renegotiate your own Labour deal? Can't you answer that one at least? A ballpark figure: 6 months, 12 months.
No, I don't think it would be as long as that. But I'm not going to start giving you the exact figures because we are not in a position to even begin the negotiations. We do know that what we have put forward is a baseline. It makes sense. Everyone accepts it makes sense. It hangs together, and it would be a basis for an agreement, and it could be done. Remember that Theresa May spent 2 years negotiating with the Tory party. Exactly how much time she's really spent seriously negotiating with Europe it could be measured. I mean, how much time did David Davis actually spend in Europe discussing a potential deal? Hardly any at all. It's all been about this place and the Tories fighting amongst themselves. This is true. This is the truth.
OK, all right. Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry, thanks very much for joining us this evening. And here with me in Westminster, I've got the Conservative MP Philip Green, also the chairman of Right to Vote, and also the former deputy chair of UKIP, Suzanne Evans. Good to see you both here this evening.
Leaders of Britain.
Ah, yeah, of course. Philip Lee, I'll come to you first, because it's your party that seems to have sort of torn itself in two this evening, yet again, over this vote. What do you make of events in the Commons?
Sadly predictable. There never has been a majority for anything in the House, for anything that was going to emanate from this process. It's why I was first to resign last June as a minister. I pointed out that this was the likely outcome and reluctantly concluded that we had to go back to the British public to consult them before proceeding. I stand by that analysis.
What do you want the Prime Minister to do next? Because she laid out and suggested some options this evening.
Well, I think the difficulty is, I'm just reading my WhatsApp group, and it sounds like tomorrow's motion is a bit tricksy. It's a bit complicated.
On no deal, on ruling out
on
no
deal, and it's tied up with the extension. And I think this is going to unravel yet again. I mean, fundamentally, the Parliament wants to vote against no deal. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
And it is extraordinary to have a free vote on that tomorrow, i.e. MPs will be able to vote however they want.
She would have lost 20, maybe 30 ministers if she hadn't made it a free deal, so a free vote. And then come Thursday, there'll be an Article 50 extension vote, which will pass, but the reality is that the terms of Article 50 will be set by the EU27, not by us.
Suzanne Evans, do you think Brexiters have sort of screwed this up for you a bit here? They voted down the deal and now they might have thrown away Brexit.
No, absolutely not. The fact was, any Brexiteer with a conscience couldn't possibly have voted for May's withdrawal agreement because it's not Brexit. It's what we call Brino, Brexit in name only. And I think it's absolutely appalling that, the biggest democratic mandate in British history, more people than ever before turned out to vote in the EU referendum. There was a decisive vote for leave, and it's being ignored by politicians in the Houses of Parliament. We've got a massive disconnect between what the people want, and there's a YouGov poll out today saying that only 12% of people thought May's deal represented what they voted for, the leave vote, and people in there who frankly are just not doing the will of the people. And what I really think is important to say about this whole Brexit debate is it's now become bigger than Brexit. It's become about democracy. It's become about how accountable our members of Parliament are and the depths to which they're prepared to sink to actually try and overturn a democratic mandate. It's appalling.
I mean, I come back to my original point, though. Do you not fear that they've made the perfect the enemy of the good in there tonight? Because Brexiters have voted down this deal, and now tomorrow you could take no deal off the table. You could be looking at an extension of Article 50. The Prime Minister mentioned the word second referendum tonight. I mean, that is a threat to you guys, isn't it?
Well, I think any member of Parliament that votes to take no deal off the table tomorrow is three things, really. They're a bit stupid because they wouldn't go and buy a car and say, I'm going to buy a car however much it costs and whatever the terms are. So to take no deal off the table means they cannot negotiate. And frankly, if they're that thick, they shouldn't be members of Parliament whatsoever. Nobody in their right mind would agree to take take no deal off the table and basically give the European Union carte blanche to keep us in servitude forever. It's simply ridiculous to even think that they might do that. Now, I suspect they probably will, and that's why I come back to what I said earlier. We have a bigger problem here than Brexit. We have a much bigger problem, and it's about democracy and political accountability in this country.
And coming back to that point, I mean, you are in favour of a second referendum.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Suzanne Evans saying that that would be a betrayal of democracy?
What would be a betrayal of the people of Britain would be to deliver a Brexit that they were not promised. On that I would agree. The problem for the Leave campaign was what was promised is not deliverable. So therefore, to use this mandate from 2016 and say we must deliver Brexit at all costs, despite the fact the campaign itself was full of fantasy, I personally think would be profoundly undemocratic. And how on earth can it be anti-democratic to go back to the public and ask them again? I struggle to understand that.
What vote Leave put forward was absolutely deliverable. I mean, the Business of Britain wrote a booklet this thick, a tome this thick, on how we would actually get out of the European Union.
So when you said Turkey accession, was that a fact or was that just to stir up?
You know they are an accession country.
Yes,
Let's not rerun the referendum campaign, but the book didn't mention the backstop, did it?
Well, no, the backstop's a complete red
herring.
Or
the 39 billion.
In my view. The fact is, what was promised was perfectly deliverable. With a Prime Minister who believed in Brexit,
where is
a
this
civil
written?
service that believed in Brexit, and a parliamentariat that had the gumption to actually do what the people voted for. And that's where it's gone horribly wrong. It's been massively, the whole 2.5 years have been wasted by parliamentarians who simply won't enact the will of the people, can still not get over the Leave vote. They're still in shock. They won't accept it.
I mean, as someone who didn't campaign in the 2016 election, I listen to this and I think, where is this publication that's evidence-based, based in reality, that delivers what was promised in 2016? This publication doesn't exist because it can't exist. That's the reality of it.
Well, maybe the reality
for the British public to have been had like this and then to proceed with this as a mandate, I'm not saying overturn the result. I'm just saying go back and just check. Just check what the public really want to do.
OK, all right, well, look, we'll watch to see what happens next. But thanks to both of you for joining me this evening, Philip Lee and Suzanne Evans. OK, let's go to Central Lobby now. And the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, Nicky Morgan, the Conservative MP, of course, is standing by for us this evening. Good evening to you, Nicky Morgan.
Hello, Paul. Hi.
So, look, you were part of discussions behind the scenes to come up with what was known as the Malthouse Compromise. That was the compromise, of course, she was hoping, the Prime Minister hoping to renegotiate with the EU. Hasn't ultimately come to anything this evening. What do you make of this defeat?
Well, I think it's very disappointing, and I think that people outside Westminster are going to wonder what on earth we are all doing and how it is that the House of Commons has not approved the withdrawal agreement, which, although imperfect, would have given people more certainty, been able to plan, would have got the transition period, guaranteed the rights of EU citizens. And as we stand tonight, there is less certainty, less stability for the governing party, which I don't think is good for the country. And we've now got, as I think I just heard you saying to Suzanne Evans, the options of no deal being taken off the table and an extension to Article 50 being subject to votes in the House of Commons, which takes us a step further away from implementing the referendum result rather than a step towards it. And I think it's a very curious situation to have found ourselves in.
What do you think the Prime Minister ought to do next? What do you think the best option is for her now?
Well, I think we obviously need to hear how the next couple of votes on taking no deal off the table and Article 50 extension are going to be handled. In particular, in relation to Article 50, what is the strategy? How long would the request be for? What's the plan if you were to get an extension? All those things remain unanswered at the moment. Unanswered because I think the Prime Minister hoped very much we weren't going to get to this situation, and I think that's probably where most of the country is too. So I think a strategy, obviously the Prime Minister has acknowledged the size of the defeat tonight, and I think there's probably, we need to hear as well what she thinks is going to happen with the agreement that she has so painstakingly negotiated.
Do you think there's any chance of a third go at the meaningful vote? Do you think there's any chance she may go back to Brussels, try and keep this deal alive, perhaps with the help of the likes of you, Nicky Morgan, and some others in the Conservative Party? Do you think there's any scope left to have another look at the Malthouse Compromise and come up with something?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, obviously I support the withdrawal agreement and I will vote for it if we were asked to do so again. And actually the Malthouse Compromise, part of it was about finding alternative arrangements to the backstop, which is what many people have a problem with, because they think it leads to automatically being part of a customs union for locked into that. There are alternative arrangements that can be agreed. We can obviously get more details of those. Actually, the EU have moved some considerable way to making it clear in a legally binding way that those alternative arrangements would be negotiated. I mean, it's possible that today actually is a consequence of, as colleagues such as Ian Duncan-Smith has said, everything being done in quite a rush. You know, that the announcements only came from the EU last night. The Attorney General's legal opinion was only supplied earlier on this morning, and so it may well be that people need a bit more time to digest everything. But obviously, we're now on to other votes on other issues. I think it's just really unpredictable, and anybody who says they know what's going to happen is not telling the truth, because there are lots of long-standing MPs and long-standing political commentators who have no idea what's going to happen now.
It is quite fun speculating, though, Nicky Morgan, and let's have a think about Thursday's vote in terms of extending Article 50. How long do you think the Prime Minister should extend Article 50 for? What do you think a good amount of time would be?
Well, I think it's a really difficult decision because, on the one hand, businesses and employers are saying to me, look, a short 3-month extension is hopeless because it doesn't give us any more certainty and we might end up back in the same situation as we ended up in now, unless, of course, there is a strategy for what's going to happen. Now, part of the Malthouse Compromise was Plan B, and I think it's worth recognising that actually there are a number of sectors where actually no-deal preparations are actually quite well advanced on both sides of the Channel. If there were to be a number of different agreements that can be put together, and that was the plan between now and, say, the end of June, that's one strategy. Otherwise, you end up going for something much longer, which obviously means that the consensus built in the House of Commons, it's a completely different agreement that might eventually be put. But of course, I think out of the country again, people are going to think, well, this is never going to happen. And people who voted for Brexit are going to wonder when and if it's going to happen. And everyone else is just saying, get on with it. So there are, I mean, it's a very difficult choice. I mean, there are no easy and there are no right answers now with any of this. It's just a question, I think, of being as honest with people as ministers can be.
There is talk of the Prime Minister perhaps opting for an even more extreme measure here. How would you feel if she calls a general election?
Well, I would feel, I can see why, in the sense of traditionally that's how we resolve political impasses in this country at the end of the day. If the government can't get its legislation through, I have to say not one person in my constituency in the country has said they want to have a general election. And I would fear that actually it's not going to resolve anything, and that it'd be very unclear on what platform I think any of the main political party candidates would be standing. So I don't think politicians should be fearful of elections. That's what we're there to do, is to be accountable to our electorates. But equally, if it's not going to resolve the situation and not going to create more certainty, then I wonder why that would be put on the table.
And just lastly, I know we've asked this question before. I know technically it can't be revisited for some time because the Prime Minister survived that vote of no confidence last year. But do you think she can continue much longer, given that she's used up all of her negotiating power, she's used up all of her authority, arguably, and that she's run out of road?
Well, I said at the weekend that I thought if the vote tonight was lost, and then if the votes the next couple of days went against the Prime Minister's strategy, which she has very much stuck to for the last couple of years, I think that does make her position very difficult to see how she'd carry on. That's a conversation she'll want to have with the Cabinet, or the Cabinet will want to have with her. I'm sure the Prime Minister will want to carry on. I mean, one of her hallmarks has been this phenomenal resilience in the face of things that the rest of us would have been knocked sideways by. So I think a lot will depend on her personally as well, and how the Cabinet, as I say, see the strategy going forward. And I think much of this is one of these other unpredictable things that has been thrown on the table by tonight's defeat for the government and for the Prime Minister's agreement.
OK, Nicky Morgan in Central Lobby, thanks very much for joining us this evening. All right, let's get a bit more reaction from some of the other political parties in Westminster, and I'm joined by two MPs this evening, Tom Brake from the Liberal Democrats and Richard Bergen, who's Shadow Justice Secretary. Good evening to both of you. Tom Brake, your party has been pushing for a second referendum right from the start. What did you make of the Prime Minister actually mentioning the word second referendum tonight in that statement?
Well, I welcome the fact that she mentions it. I think she's now in a position where, frankly, that may be the only option she's got left, because, of course, her deal has been very heavily defeated. Her deal, clearly, in parliamentary terms, is going nowhere. But there are a number of MPs, me included, for instance, who, if she were willing to say, well, I will push my deal through, but it'll be subject to a people's vote at the end of it, so that people could choose to vote either for my deal or to stay in the European Union, that's something which we could work with her on.
And Richard Bergen, I've just been asking Emily Thornberry about this too, but it's not clear exactly how Labour will proceed now. I mean, you sounded a few weeks ago, not you personally, but the party sounded a few weeks ago as if you were going to progress towards a position of backing a second referendum, and yet you're back tonight to talking about negotiating your own deal. Where are you at with all this?
Well, some sort of public vote, for example, a general election or a referendum of some description may become necessary if Parliament can't decide on anything, or if we're, for example, staring no deal in the face. But our priority is, and always has been, pushing Labour's alternative Brexit deal.
But you have been trying that for months, though, Richard Bergen, and it hasn't succeeded. And you say if Parliament can't decide on something, well, right now, tonight, they can't decide on something. When are you going to press for a second referendum, as per your conference motion last year?
Well, Theresa May's got to accept that her deal is dead in the water. I think she needs to reach out across the House. I think we can build a consensus across the House for an alternative Brexit deal based upon our proposal that we've been pushing for a long time. But you're right, it may be that a public vote and the public having their say again may become necessary if Parliament can't decide on anything. Obviously later this week we've got other votes coming up. Firstly, rejecting no deal. I expect that Parliament will quite rightly reject no deal and the disastrous economic consequences that would cause. And if we then move on to the Article 50 vote, and we do believe that Article 50 will need extending by a short time, given the mess the government's made of these negotiations.
What should happen to Labour members of the shadow team if they vote against the whip tomorrow, if they vote to maintain no deal on the table, or on Thursday if they vote not to extend Article 50?
Well, I think only 3 Labour MPs tonight rebelled and voted with the government, and I'm very, very disappointed that a small number of MPs did that. I don't anticipate that anybody in the shadow cabinet would be voting against an extension of Article 50 or would be voting for a disastrous no deal. We're very much united on that.
Okay, all right, and Tom Brake, I mean, maybe you should take a leaf out of Labour's book here, because you've been pushing for a second referendum for a long time. It hasn't really done the Lib Dems any favours.
Well, I think what has happened in relation to a people's vote is that the desire for one has grown very significantly. When we were campaigning on it 2.5 years ago, there were very, very few people who were talking about it. There was only perhaps 1 person out of 5 in the general population who thought it was the way forward. We're now in a position where more than half of the population believe that. It is being talked about every day, including by the Prime Minister, and we had 750,000 people out on a march in October calling for a people's vote. So
I mean, listen to all the noise behind us.
You know,
listen to the noise behind us this evening, the flags, the protests. They've been going on here for months. I mean, if you'd imagined just a couple of years ago that this would be the state of our nation, the division in our nation, do we really want to go through that again with another referendum?
Well, I think, unfortunately, the divisions are there now. There's no doubt about that. And for many people who voted Remain, one of the ways, in my view, and this would be true for me, that I would feel that the matter was resolved is if whatever deal comes forward is put to a vote. If the country votes for that deal, then I, as someone who wants us to stay in the EU, have to accept that that is the case. If instead they vote to stay in the European Union, then I'm pleased with the outcome. But I think what happened 900 days ago is that people were offered something which was clearly undeliverable, and we are now in a completely different situation in terms of what the reality of Brexit is.
Okay, and Richard Bergen, if you do go for, negotiating a Labour-style deal, it's clear that you'll need an extension of Article 50. How long do you think that extension should be?
Well, the reason for the extension, if Parliament votes for it later this week, is because the government's made a mess of the negotiations with the EU for the last nearly 3 years since the EU referendum. We could live with an extension of a matter of weeks up to, we believe, the end of June. I believe that whatever's been said by the EU at this
stage. If it were extended to the end of June, I don't believe we would need to necessarily participate in the EU elections, because we don't think that's a wise thing at this stage.
Because Jean-Claude Juncker, as you'll be well aware, the President of the European Commission, said yesterday Britain would have to participate in those European elections, but you think you could overrule that?
So he said that we could extend it until May without taking part in the EU elections. I think that's a matter of negotiation, but what I do think is, if the Prime Minister starts to listen, if she reaches out to try and build a consensus across the House rather than negotiating with her own backbenchers, then actually I believe that an alternative deal, Labour's alternative Brexit deal, can be negotiated in a matter of weeks.
I think that the difficulty for Richard, of course, is that the European Union has expressed no interest whatsoever in completely reopening a new round of negotiations. In fact, what they've been very clear in saying, actually, this is the deal that's on offer, we're not going to fiddle around with it anymore. So the idea that suddenly we'd be able to embark on probably another 6-12 months of negotiation for a completely new deal, is not on offer.
They're quite tempted by the idea of a customs union, though, the EU, aren't they? Maybe they would be persuaded to.
I was in Brussels the other week, and when I was speaking to EU negotiators and leaders from EU countries, they were very interested in the idea of a permanent customs union. They were very positive towards Labour's proposed deal. So we do believe there's real mileage in that as a way of bringing people together.
OK, all right, Richard Berg and Tom Brake, thanks to both of you for joining me this evening. OK, let's head back to Brussels now, because our correspondent Angus Walker is there for us this evening. And Angus, any more reaction out of the EU to this huge defeat in the Commons?
Yes, there has been a very coordinated response from EU leaders, and Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, the man who's been leading the team negotiating with the UK for almost 2 years, has tweeted saying the EU has done everything it can to help the withdrawal agreement over the line. The impasse can only be solved in the UK. Our no-deal preparations are now more important than ever before. So, along with Michel Barnier, we have the presidents of the Council and Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk, sending out statements via their spokespeople, saying that if there is a solution, it is in London, echoing the tweet sent by Michel Barnier, a very coordinated response, and also adding that should there be a reasoned request, as they put it, for an extension, they stand ready to consider it. But they add that the EU27 will decide, giving priority to the need to ensure the smooth functioning of the EU institutions. And that's definitely a nod towards the implication of the European Parliament elections. What implications do those elections have on the length of an extension? And if you speak to diplomats and officials here, you will hear varying thoughts on how long an extension can be. Martin Selmayr, the Commission, is known to favour a year-long extension, and others talking about a few months up until May, when those elections are held, as we were just talking about.
OK, Angus, look, while we're chatting, we're just going to keep one eye on the door of number 10 this evening, because we're expecting the Prime Minister to head back there after what a day. She should be returning to Downing Street from the House of Commons, we think any moment. Oh, she's just arrived through the back entrance of Downing Street, I'm being told, so I'm afraid the front entrance isn't much help to us this evening. But the Prime Minister back in Downing Street tonight, heading, for a glass of whiskey, up to bed? I mean, what on earth must be going through her mind this evening? She's not been well, we know that much. Her voice has been faltering today, but the Prime Minister back home tonight, planning what to do next. And Angus, coming back to you, I suppose she's going to have to pick up the phone to the EU at some point, and all eyes on this talk of an extension on Thursday. Labour have just been telling me they would like to use that extension to negotiate a different kind of deal. Do you think Brussels could be persuaded to potentially look at a whole new deal, a customs union style deal with Britain?
Well, they've always offered a Canada-style deal, Canada Plus, as they put it. I mean, that's been on the table all along. I was following Jeremy Corbyn when he came over to Brussels a couple of weeks ago, and they do receive him very favourably, and they do like Labour's idea of a customs union and close alignment with the single market. Why wouldn't they? It's obviously flattering to have a closer relationship, and of course an end result like that, a softer Brexit as some people would call it, would be a vindication of the success, as they would see it, of the European project. So, yeah, I mean, they are open to other ideas, but of course Labour isn't in power. It isn't going to be able to negotiate. And if Theresa May is still in number 10 Downing Street next week, there is a summit of EU leaders at the end of next week. And that's when there could be, or perhaps, another push by Theresa May to try and get further concessions, although we've seen from all these statements tonight from Presidents Juncker and Tusk and Michel Barnier that there is nowhere else to go. As far as the EU is concerned, that's it. You've had everything you can get from us. We've tried as hard as we can to get a solution for you, but the time has come for London, for Westminster to sort this out.
Because it was all a bit confusing yesterday, Angus. I wasn't quite sure how to read Jean-Claude Juncker when he said, this is the final negotiation, we're not going to tweak this deal any more times, this is the third or the second opportunity to vote on this deal, no more negotiation. Does that mean, though, that the EU is precluding a much broader renegotiation looking at a customs union deal?
No, they are talking specifically about the withdrawal agreement, but of course you can't go on to discuss a future trade deal, including a membership of a customs union or close alignment with the single market, until you have a withdrawal agreement, because the EU will not negotiate with another country about a trade deal unless it's negotiating with a third country. That's one of its red lines. Those are the rules of the club. So, that is yet to come. And had the deal been passed tonight, then that would be the divorce deal out the way. And we would now be entering the extension period, the transition period, and the negotiation for a future trade deal would take place.
OK, Angus Walker, thanks very much for joining us from Brussels. It'll be fascinating to be watching the reaction from the EU in the coming days. Well, that is it here from Westminster on another dramatic night of deadlock. Just 17 days left till we're due to leave the EU, though all eyes now on a possible delay. And another overwhelming defeat for Theresa May's Brexit deal this evening. Coverage continues right now on ITV.com/news, and Tom Bradby will present an extended edition of News at 10 on ITV. From me, though, thanks for watching and have a very good night.